Discovering possibilities and potential with passion every day. This is a TPPN production. Welcome to the iPad Possibilities Podcast, episode number 75. Take control of your iPad with Joe Kissell. This podcast is sponsored by Gadget Freeway. Go to gadgetfreeway.com for more information. They produce a lot of unique, specialized technology gadgets that I think would benefit most people that listen to this podcast here. And especially as we talk to Joe Kissell about working with your iPad, the iPad Pillow is something I think will be something of interest to a lot of people that want to work in bed. So go to gadgetfreeway.com to show your support for this podcast and to check out some very cool iPad-related accessories there at gadgetfreeway.com. Well, hello and welcome. This is the iPad Possibilities Podcast. This is episode 75, so kind of a big mile marker episode here as we make our way to episode number 100, and I am planning something special for that one. Not quite sure what it'll be, but a lot of good ideas popping in my head. So with that said, I wanted to update everyone before we move on to the main content of today's show. And first off, I am working currently on 3 or so shows right now. One of the big ones is going to be a diary and journaling episode that I cover all the ones that are out there, all the different ways you can journal or carry out a diary with your iPad, and kind of give you the high and lows of what's out there and kind of a good perspective of that. I'm also working on a episode for PDF markup, and I hope to have that one out this Friday. And there's a couple other just great things going on. iTeleport recently added this amazing ability to outport that VGA cable, so you can actually hook up your iPad to a monitor and use a Bluetooth keyboard, and your iPad then becomes a trackpad. So I've got a lot of thoughts on this one because I think it's an amazing potential what's going to be happening here. So I'll have my full thoughts with that coming up very soon here, possibly Friday as well with the PDF markup episode. So a lot of great things going on, a lot of great things happening. And for today's show, I've put together, actually, I didn't put this together. John Finnan actually came up with this idea and, asked me about it. And I thought, yeah, that'd be a great idea. So basically, we've got a guest on for today's show. John and I are interviewing Joe Kissell. And Joe Kissell, if you're not aware of him and who he is, he's a pretty well-known name in the Macintosh world. He's written several Take Control books. It's a whole series of books that help basically consumers understand how to use their technology more effectively, sharing some tips and tricks in there, and just a mindset of how you can work with different products. A lot of these are created for the Mac, but now that we have the iPad, I believe there's about 5 different books on this around there. But anyways, he's written one on working with your iPad. And Joe Kissell is also the senior editor of Tidbits and a senior contributor to Macworld magazine. So pretty big magazine there. And I've listened to him often on Chuck Joyner's show, Mac Voices and Mac Notables, and all of his shows over there. And it's great to have him on this show today. And I think it's going to be it is a great discussion because I've listened to it, and it's a great discussion on working with your iPad. What does it take to get productivity done on your iPad? What are the trains of thought you have to have? What is it? What do you need to do to have on your iPad, or what kind of mindset do you need to have to work successfully on your iPad? It's something that a lot of people want to do, and it's a big topic right now. Recently, iPad Today had a whole episode on working with your iPad, and recently the iPad Show had an episode on working with your iPad, so it fits into the kind of release schedule everyone else is doing. Oddly enough, this was purely coincidence, I believe. But this is all about working on your iPad, and Joe Kissell is a fresh breath of air as far as perspective, as far as what you can do with your iPad, because it's been me and John here for a while, but I thought, let's have another voice. Let's have someone else that has a good perspective, that uses the iPad on a daily basis, shares thoughts. So with that said, let's get on to the interview John and I did with Joe Kissell. Well, welcome. We're here today with both John and Joe Kissell. Joe Kissell is an author of many Take Control books, and the one we're going to be focusing on today is Working with Your iPad. And he's the senior editor of Tidbits, a senior contributor to Macworld magazine, and now the website, and the author of many print electronic books about the Mac. So welcome, Joe. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
And John is also here. How are you doing, John?
Good, Tim.
So, John, you set this all up. What's your background with Joe? Have you been following his work for some time, or?
I've been a purchaser of several of Joe's books, and I think he has a good outlook on Macs and software and everything. And so I saw he was doing work with iPad Take Control books, and so took a look at it, and I think we got some good information here and a source to tap into. So that's what we're doing here today.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard you speak with Chuck Joyner over at the Mac Voices group a couple times, and
I've been on a bunch of times.
Yeah. So the Take Control books, what are those exactly? Your goal with those?
So we've been doing Take Control books since 2003. I mean, in computer years, that's like forever. We started because there were a group of us, Adam Engst and Glenn Fleischman and Matt Newberg and several other sort of Tidbits contributors who kind of felt like there was a lot of things wrong with the publishing world. I mean, we've all written a bunch of conventional print books, and it's been frustrating because it takes so long to get a book onto the shelves that once it's there, it's already out of date. And because things are changing so quickly, it's really hard to sell enough books to even earn back your advance before before its shelf life has expired. And readers don't like that either because they're paying a lot of money for this big hunk of paper that goes out of date so quickly. And so we thought that we would try a little experiment, and we would try to create books that worked more like software. So instead of having, instead of paying $30 or $40 or $50 for some huge, 600, 900 page book, we'll ask for, $5 or $10 for a whatever 100, 150 page book, and we'll update it. So when the situation changes, we can update the book, and if it's a relatively minor update, we'll give it to you for free, just like a free software update. And if it's a more major upgrade, we might charge you for the new version. But the point is, we're giving you much more content than you would get from a magazine article. And a much more focused content than you would get from a book, and we're trying to sort of invent a new way of distributing content about the Mac and the internet. When we started doing this, ebooks weren't really a thing. I mean, they existed, but they weren't the phenomenon that they are today. And it was a sort of new, unusual, different kind of thing. And we've been very successful. I mean, there are quite a number of us that make the majority of our livings writing these Take Control books. We've sold bazillions of them. Readers like them a lot, and we enjoy writing them. So that's kind of what they're all about.
Okay, very cool. I had a question for you with the whole ebook industry right now. Are you actually able to? I know you guys sell them through your site, and I love that because you don't have to use DRM and all that stuff, so it's more free. You can actually use it on any device you want to, which is fantastic. But if you started to sell things through like iBooks or Kindle, is there a way for authors to update their books like you want to with these tech books?
Yeah, well, it's complicated. Yeah. So the first thing that we did was we started making some of our ebooks available as iPhone apps. And some of them have sold reasonably well, some of them not so much. Also, some of them are available in O'Reilly's Safari Online. We were really excited about iBooks and the iBook store, and we do actually have some of our titles in there now. But the problem is that when you are buying from some other source other than the Take Control website, we have no control over things like coupons and updates and the sorts of things that that make this work so well. Bundles, for example, we often have sales and special bundles and all kinds of ways you can save money, but Apple's iBookstore doesn't give us the flexibility we need to do the same thing there. So that's a source of frustration for us. Another source of frustration is that the EPUB format that the iBookstore uses is okay, but it doesn't have the same richness that a PDF does. We can't do the same sorts of things with formatting that we can do in a PDF. And so some of the things don't look quite right and don't work quite right. And the iBookstore or the iBooks app does let you import PDFs, but there's no real simple way that we can say, okay, you have just an iPad or just an iPhone, go to our store, click a couple buttons, download the PDF and get it into iBooks. It's really kind of complicated, and the easiest way to do it is to buy it on your computer and transfer it over, which is a real hassle. So there are parts of the whole ecosystem that aren't working ideally right now. But we are doing our very best to find ways to get our books into all the different digital formats that make sense. And we are sort of cautiously optimistic about iBooks, and we hope that it's very successful. We also hope that it becomes a little more flexible for us.
Yeah. Do you think Apple will ever sell PDFs? I mean, they support it in their app, but I'm not sure if they would or not. What's your take on that?
I kind of doubt it. I mean, I wish they would, obviously. But the thing is that with PDFs, Apple can't do that kind of DRM that they want. And I think that's sort of another instance of, Apple wants all the control, and if you use PDFs, you're giving up a lot of control. People can stick a lot of things in PDFs. I mean, the whole kerfuffle this week is over. It's because of PDF exploit that you can jailbreak your iPhone and do all this stuff. And I mean, that's great about PDFs that you can put stuff in them, but bad for Apple. So I sort of suspect that they probably won't, but I have never been successful in trying to predict or second guess what Apple's going to do. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, before we get too far into iPads and all that, you've been a Mac guy for quite a long time. What's your background? Can you go a little bit into more of that?
Yeah, well, reaching into the far distant past, I have degrees in philosophy and linguistics, which today, have like zero applicability to my life. It was while I was in grad school that I started using Macs, and I eventually, I had some sort of odd jobs, and I eventually started working at Nisus Software, and I was initially doing tech support, and then I did various other things, and I became a product manager. And then I worked at Kensington doing managing software development for a bunch of years. And it was actually while I was working at Nisus that I had my first book published. That was back in 1996. And since then, I have had, 8 print books, 24 ebooks. And there's a little bit of overlap between those two. About 100 articles for Macworld, about the same number for Tidbits. And since around 2003-ish, writing about the Mac has been my full-time job. So I don't really think of myself as being a writer so much as a technologist, and writing just happens to be what I have done. But I sort of have geek roots that go way back.
Yeah. Well, what's your process for creating all these books, and especially this new iPad book? Do you first do a bunch of playing and just discovering apps and testing it all out, or what's your kind of process?
Yeah, well, I mean, it varies a lot depending on what the topic is we're discussing. I mean, we have a large group of really smart, really talented authors and editors. And, there are certain titles that, somebody comes up with the idea, oh, we really need to write, this sort of book on the iPad or this sort of book about backups, whatever, and it's just sort of obvious to everyone, oh, of course we need to do that. And then we just figure out, what is the best author for this book? What is the best editor? Sometimes, I will go to Adam and Tanya Angst and say, I'd really like to write a book about this, and we'll discuss it and see if it's something that we think will sell. So the ideas from books come from different places, but it's ultimately, the author is going to be someone who is really familiar with the subject material, who's probably, worked with it, used it themselves a lot, and is really enthusiastic about the topic. And it's also obviously got to be something that we think will, interest enough people that it'll sell. So what usually happens is I'll create a very detailed outline. I'll send it around, get everybody else's opinion on it. We'll sort of hone that. I'll start writing. As I'm writing, I'm doing a lot of research. So I'm downloading apps. I'm testing them. I'm experimenting. I'm also getting feedback from other people. When I feel like I have a complete solid manuscript, I start. Have the editing process starts. It'll go back and forth between me and my editor for however long it takes, and then we have a whole technical review pass where all of the authors and editors and a few hangers-on are invited to come look at the manuscript and tear it apart and make sure that it's technically accurate. And then we have there are various other steps in the process I won't bore you with, but basically it's sort of similar to what you would go through for a major magazine or for what you'd go through with a major book publisher. It's really just that our end result is a PDF rather than paper. So the amount of work and experimentation and research that's involved really varies a lot based on the subject matter and how much work I've done with the thing already. With the iPad book, I had just gotten my first iPad, and it's like, okay, start writing right now. So as I was writing it, I was also, downloading and testing out new apps every day. And every time I'd think, okay, now I can send my editor the manuscript, some major new app would appear, and like, I got to go back to revise, and that just sort of happened a lot, and it has kept happening in the few months since the book has been released. So. It's the iPad world is just changing so fast. It's very hard to stay on top of it, but we're doing our best.
Yeah. Well, your book is all about working on your iPad. And did you use your Mac, I'm guessing, to actually write the book?
Yeah. This is something that we may talk about later. It's something I talk about in the book, and it's a bit of a sore spot for me. I had this vision, this dream, this hope that I could actually use my iPad to write the book about the iPad. But unfortunately, our requirements for the kinds of things you need to do when writing a manuscript are just way beyond what any iPad app can currently do. I mean, we use lots of heavy-duty, obscure features in Word that there just isn't currently any way to do on an iPad. If you're just typing, hey, great. And there are lots of apps that will import and export files in Word format. So if you need to do just sort of basic kinds of stuff, it's no problem. But for what we needed, the tools just aren't there yet. So I'm a bit unhappy about that. But it was a real learning experience. I talk a lot in the book about the fact that whether or to what extent you can use an iPad to substitute for a laptop really depends on what your work is. So if you're a blogger and you really traffic mainly in plain text, then chances are, it'll be just fine for you. If you work a lot with spreadsheets and you don't have very elaborate needs, and there are a bunch of spreadsheet apps, and you can probably do your work on an iPad, and there are a bunch of good database apps and other things. But if you need to do high-end music production or video editing or things that need a lot of screen real estate, there are just certain kinds of tasks that unfortunately just aren't going to work out right now on an iPad. And much to my chagrin, writing books is one of those.
Yeah. Well, this is a big topic right now. Working on the iPad Show and iPad Today both had episodes on this. So it seems, John, that you picked a good time to do this.
Yeah. You're very, very right, Tim. There's a lot of people talking about this now, and actually there's a little bit of a heated debate that's been going on really since the iPad was introduced about whether it's really a content creation device or merely a content consumption device. And I guess your Take Control book kind of it makes it seem like you're coming down on the side of content creation, maybe with a slight reservation, but why don't you cover that?
Well, sure. I mean, to be brutally honest, I use my own iPad more for consumption than for creation. But then again, that was why I bought it, because those are the things that it does really well for me, for my needs, for my lifestyle. But look, people have created fantastic, beautiful artwork. Artwork for major magazines and cover art on the iPad. They have made musical recordings. They have written books, articles, blog posts, retouched photos, recorded songs. I mean, a lot of great content has already been created on the iPad, and a lot more will be. So it's sort of silly to say, well, it's just for consumption. Of course not. There are many fantastic apps that let you create all kinds of stuff. It's just that, as you say, I have some reservations because my own needs for content creation don't happen to be met today by the iPad. Maybe they will be tomorrow or next week, but right now they aren't. And so, I don't. It's not a topic that I can sort of have a religious opinion about. I mean, the people who say that it's not for content creation have a point, in that you can't create all the same kinds of content on it you can with a desktop or laptop computer. But it's also equally silly to say that you can't create any content at all on it, because clearly you can.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned in your book about adopting a new mindset to work on the iPad. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, this is one of the things, I was writing the book and I'd almost finished the manuscript, and I had these long conversations with Tanya Angst about it, because I felt like, something just isn't right. It doesn't feel right to me. I don't feel good about this. It doesn't sort of feel take control-ish. And we after a lot of discussion and introspection, we sort of decided that the reason I didn't feel good about it was that I was trying to treat the iPad, and specifically this idea of doing productive work on the iPad, in the same way that I would approach doing it on a computer. That is, it's sort of a fully mature platform. And that really is unfair. So I realized that I not only needed to adopt a different mindset when writing about this, but I needed for my readers to think about it in a different way. So I have this little section at the beginning of the book that's these sort of 4 principles that I'm saying, if you do things this way, you'll be happier. You'll be happier doing work on your iPad, or at least dealing with what you can't do. So therefore, first is don't think of it as a computer. So I mean, of course, it is a computing device. I mean, it has a CPU, it has a display, it has input and output. But if you think of it as a computer, then you're going to assume that it can do all the things that a Mac or a PC can do, and then you'll get frustrated when it can't. So my advice is just don't think of it as a computer. Think of it as a new kind of device. Think of it on its own terms and look for what it can and can't do. Second principle was sort of adopt the pioneering spirit. So the iPad has only been in existence for a few months. There are a bunch of apps out there and a bunch of accessories, but many, many, many more will come in the future. And so you have to sort of understand, I as an iPad owner or user, am in the first wave. We're all figuring it out. Apple's figuring it out. Third-party developers are figuring it out. Other users are figuring it out. Where are the things that what are the things it's good at, the things that are bad at, the best ways of using it. And if you have that sort of pioneering spirit, you're going to feel more excited about, oh, I've just discovered some new capability, instead of, oh, well, the iPad doesn't play Flash, so screw it. Instead of just sort of assuming, well, it's a fully baked platform that should do everything. And along those lines, my third principle is expect change, because, as I said, even while I was writing the book, software was changing from under me, and it's constantly changing. So don't take anything that anybody tells you, including what I tell you, as gospel because it'll change tomorrow. There will be some update, or Apple will pull some app, or a third-party developer will come up with something new, and you're like, oh, now it's different. Now it does this. And then my fourth principle was take it with you everywhere. So get in the habit of carrying it with you on every possible occasion, and just try to do all your stuff with it. If you fail, then it might be, well, I got to find a new app, or it might be I need a new accessory, or it might be, oh, sorry, I just can't do that with this today. I need to do it on my computer instead. But sort of the more you have it with you and get used to trying to do stuff with it, the more interesting uses you're going to discover. And so this is what I've largely tried to do myself, and it's helped me to feel a lot better about my approach to being productive on the iPad.
Sure. And I had one question. Looking back, I like to kind of compare sometimes the Apple Newton and the iPad. Were you a Newton user, or how do you compare the two? Because I know the Newton was really geared towards productivity and business. That's what it was for. Now the iPad is, kind of a everything object.
Right. Oh, well, let me tell you a little story. When the Newton just before the Newton came out, in fact, I was working at Westinghouse in Pittsburgh, and my boss arranged for an Apple rep to come in and give a private secret demonstration of the Newton it was just my boss and me and our IT guy, a friend of mine. So it was very hush-hush. Nobody else could see it. Nobody else could know about it. And I was so excited. I mean, I read all about it. I knew about the handwriting recognition and how it was supposed to work. So we were considering, like getting a bunch of these for our department. So the guy hands me the Newton. He's like, try it out. So the very first thing I did was I wrote my boss's name on it to see how the handwriting recognition works. So my boss's name was Wolowick. And I wrote that, I lift up the stylus, and, they have a little poof, and it changes from your handwriting into the text. And the text it changed into was nobody. And I'm like, oh my God, this is brilliant. It is, this is the most insightful I've never seen. We had a really good laugh about that because it correctly identified, my boss as a nobody. But so I was really excited about the Newton, despite its, little quirks, but I could never afford one. And a couple years later, the Palm Pilots came out, and of course they took off in ways that the Newton never did. Even though they were much less powerful, and you had the graffiti instead of the real handwriting recognition, and you had the smaller screen, slower processor, and all that kind of stuff, but everybody was like, but it's simple. It's easy to understand. It does the 4 or 5 things that I mainly need, and so that was what sold it for a lot of people, and that was what sold it for me. And we all kind of said, oh yeah, if only the Newton had been like this. So when I look at the iPad, I feel like Apple has really learned that lesson. It feels to me like it is more sort of psychologically in the lineage of the Palm than in the lineage of Newton. So yes, it is much more multifunctional, can do all this kind of stuff, but Apple has tried really hard to keep it simple, to keep it really, really simple. Whereas, in the Microsoft world, Microsoft's story is, well, we're going to have Windows 7 for slate PCs, and they've tried this again and again and again, trying to squeeze a desktop operating system into some device that is basically just a laptop without a keyboard. And that's what Newton did. It tried to be too much, and it failed because it lost out on the simplicity. So I think Apple has the right idea in keeping the iPad relatively simple, and time will tell how well that succeeds. But so far, it looks like they're doing awfully well.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, John, do you have any questions?
Sure. You talk about a lot of different apps in the document. I mean, do you have a core set of apps that you use on the iPad?
Sure. Leaving aside the recreational and non-productivity apps, of which I have many, so the one app I would be completely lost without is Simple Note. Apple has a Notes app on the iPad, and there are a bazillion other ways that you can take plain text notes. But I just really, really love Simple Note for keeping basic notes and lists and stuff. It syncs to the cloud, it syncs to my Mac, it syncs to my iPhone. And it's just so simple and so reliable that I rely on that very heavily. There are loads of apps that let you connect to cloud storage for uploading, downloading, sharing files, viewing PDFs, all that kind of stuff. I happen to like AirSharing HD and Goodreader. Both of those connect to a bunch of different cloud services. They let you get files on and off of your iPad in a lot of different ways. Read, different kinds of documents. Everybody needs one app like that, and there are lots. If you use Google Apps, Docs and spreadsheets and so on, you'll want an app that can connect to those services, and a bunch of apps do. But I'm particularly fond of Documents to Go from DataViz because it has currently, in my judgment, the best editing capabilities for word processing and spreadsheet files that are stored on Google Docs. So if those are the types of documents you create, Documents to Go or something in that vein is a very good choice. Lots of note-taking apps if you need to take notes in meetings or whatever. There's one that actually has handwriting recognition if you want to use your fingertip or a stylus. It's called WritePad. I personally would rather type, but that's me. If you'd rather write, there are ways of doing that. And beyond that, it's really a matter of your personal taste or what counts as work for you. I know a lot of people are really into Evernote. I think you guys are into Evernote. There's obviously an Evernote app for the iPad, and a lot of people really like to sort of design their workflow around that. I have it. It's not. I don't really focus on that, but my world mainly revolves around text, so I look at the apps that help me to manipulate text.
Okay. And dealing with the multiple file problem of versioning and all that iTunes has made a mess of with their sharing feature, which I'm glad it's there. It'd really be terrible if it wasn't. But have you taken a look at PadSync by Ecamm?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, PadSync is an application that runs on your Mac, and it basically gives you an easier way than iTunes of dealing with getting files onto and off of your iPad that would otherwise sync with iTunes. So its sort of central feature is that if you have there's some file, like a Word file that you've copied to whatever app on your iPad, and now it changes on your Mac, it'll automatically update it on your iPad and vice versa. So it keeps any given file up to date on both platforms. So that's nice and that's useful. I still really wish for a lot more, though. I mean, I wish that I never ever had to go through iTunes to transfer files. There are ways of doing it over Wi-Fi, but they're too complicated. That should be built in. You should be able to sync anything you want seamlessly, easily over Wi-Fi. Apple really needs to make that easier. The whole if you have like pages or numbers, the whole process of getting things in and getting things out is just way too cumbersome, especially if it's going to end up in some other format. Like, you're importing a Word file, then you mess with it in Pages and you export it as a Word file. It's just too many steps and too many copies of the document. So PadSync helps with a portion of that. But I think what's really needed is more fundamental changes in the iOS, and we can hope that they will come eventually.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, here. So you also talk about some more specialized kind of applications. You mentioned a little bit. You mentioned My Writing Nook for iPad for writers, and I know Tim is big with the My Memoir, which is another creative writing app. Do you think these tools will be what authors use? Are these specialty apps what the iPad is really all about?
Well, assuming you have a keyboard, the iPad is a great tool for creative writing. You don't have all the clutter and distractions you have on a conventional computer, and you can do your writing in more different places. As someone who has spent many, many hours typing on laptops, I appreciate the fact that the iPad doesn't get hot when I'm writing. I appreciate the fact that the battery lasts such a long time. I could easily imagine writing an entire novel on an iPad. But whether a Mac is a better tool for doing this kind of stuff sort of depends on your habits and preferences. I mean, I mentioned earlier, one of the things I really like is screen real estate. I mean, if I could afford it, I would have 6 30-inch displays on my desk. I love to have lots of different things open at the same time and be able to look here, look there without a lot of switching around. If this is true on the Mac, where I already have a bigger screen, it's even more so on the iPad. I'm not saying that Apple has done the wrong thing in not having multiple windows on the screen at the same time, but I am saying that if your style of working requires you to have a lot of stuff on the screen at the same time for maximum productivity, I mean, not just the half page that you're currently typing, but your notes and a couple of PDFs and a web page and other stuff that you're referring to constantly, then it's not going to be such a great environment. But if it's just sort of pure creative writing where the stuff is coming out of your head, I think it's an amazing tool for writing. And so yeah, I think there are a lot of specific tasks like that where the iPad is starting to really shine. But it's I don't think it's ever going to be a slam dunk that of course you'll do this on the iPad instead of on a computer, because everybody has a different set of preferences.
Sure.
But that kind of leads me into another question. I know you wrote a Take Control book about the new version of DevonThink, which is an information management program, and I'm a user of it and an owner of your book. It's helped greatly.
Thank you.
So what, being that the iPad presents an ability to have information at your fingertips no matter where you are, what do you see the role of an iPad in information management? Do you see apps like this move into the iPad, or what do you see?
Yeah, for sure. So Devon Technologies is working on an iPad app. That's not secret, and I've been beta testing it. It's really cool. I'm really jazzed about it. I mean, it hasn't even been released yet. It hasn't even been finished yet, and I'm already wishing for it to have more features and hoping for more things that'll appear sort of down the road. I use DevonThink. I like it. It's a very important tool to me. But I do sometimes get frustrated by the fact that the model it follows is very sort of there you have a single storage place for your data, and that storage place is on your computer, and it's kind of awkward you can get at it from other computers, but it's sort of awkward to sync that data to other locations, and it's especially awkward if you want to sync it via the cloud. It can be done, but it's not clean. It's not easy. It's a different sort of a model than something like Evernote follows. So I would be even happier still with DevonThink if it had a better way to do cloud syncing of its stuff, and who knows, maybe it'll evolve that way in the future. But in general, I very much like the idea of like I have a sort of paperless office thing going, and I scan every piece of paper that comes in. I do OCR on them, and that's one of the big things that I use DevonThink for, is storing all of my paper documents. So having all of that stuff, or at least a lot of it, available and searchable on my iPad as well as on my computer, that's really, really helpful. If I didn't have to physically copy many, gigabytes of files onto my iPad, and if I could do input on the iPad as well, that would be even better. But I do think that using something on an iPad or a similar device to manage documents is going to be a very big wave of the future.
Yeah. I actually purchased a few years ago DevonThink Pro Office, $130, awesome one with the OCR and all that. And
Right.
I stopped using it because it didn't have cloud syncing, and I eventually just switched over to Evernote, even though it was simpler, but that cloud stuff was essential for what I was using it for.
Yeah, there are a lot of things, when I hear, oh, cloud this and cloud that, my initial reaction is kind of like, it's just a word. But I have to say, if you take something like Dropbox, I wasn't, immediately won over, but the more I've used it, it really, really has changed my experience of using computing device. It has made my life so much easier and so much better. There are a lot of things that I just don't have to think about anymore. Well, of course the document's accessible no matter where I am. Of course it is. I have an iPhone, an iPad, 2 MacBook Pros. I have, a lot of computers around here, and I like being able to get at all my stuff all the time. So any sort of link to the cloud is becoming increasingly crucial if you want if you want your stuff to be accepted widely.
Yeah. Well, since the book's come out, there's been, I think, at least 2 really important apps. One's OmniFocus and one's FileMaker Go. Are you a user of either of those?
I'm not. For those listeners who don't know, OmniFocus is a task management application that more or less follows the getting things done approach. So for GTD followers, this is kind of the app to have. There's a Mac version which became very popular. Now it's available for the iPad, and I think OmniFocus on the iPad is one of the highest rated apps I've seen. I mean, people just love it. And I have to say, it's very well suited for the iPad's design. You can do it on the iPhone, but it's way better on the iPad. So if you are into the GTD model, I think it's a really excellent choice. I have been sort of in the things world for a long time, and sad to say, things on the iPad just isn't anywhere near as good as things on Mac OS X. But I have built up too much inertia to want to switch over right now. But I believe the people who proclaim their deep love for OmniFocus, and I wouldn't be surprised if I did switch at some point. FileMaker Go, now before that was released, there were a couple of other apps that would let you access a FileMaker database on an iPad, but they were only kind of so-so, and this is FileMaker's own app. So it either lets you connect to an existing database that's running on FileMaker server somewhere or on your Mac, or you can actually download an entire base and run it locally on your iPad. So if you use FileMaker Pro, then this is, without any question, the app to have. I have FileMaker Pro, but that's just sort of not my thing. I don't really live in the database world too much. So it's not something that I use, but if I did, that would certainly be the way I'd do it.
Okay. John, do you have any questions you want to chime in with?
There's a kind of a thought in my mind about how useful for a business user the iPad is without 3G. There's been a lot of, and I had initially the Wi-Fi version and later got the 3G version, and just recently sold my Wi-Fi version. So how do you see that continual connectivity for a business user? Is that really going to make the iPad a much better tool, or is Wi-Fi enough?
Well, I mean, my answer to that is similar to how I've answered a lot of questions, which is it depends. I got a Wi-Fi iPad as soon as they came out, and I expected that as soon as the 3G model was available, I'd get one of those too, and I haven't yet because I haven't needed it. As it turns out, all of the places that I have ended up using my iPad are places where there's Wi-Fi anyway. So, my home, Starbucks, the library, local cafes, parks, I mean, they all have Wi-Fi. So for what I do with my iPad, I never not often enough get into a situation where I don't already have Wi-Fi. So if you travel a lot, or if you commute on a bus or train or whatever, if you are frequently without Wi-Fi, then sure, 3G is kind of a no-brainer. But whereas I thought I would be in those situations a lot, it turned out that I'm not. Now, I should say that if you are willing to jailbreak your iOS device or buy some hardware from a cell phone carrier, there are other ways of getting 3G connectivity besides getting a 3G iPad. So you can get a MiFi, or you can get any of several other gadgets that will suck down a 3G signal and broadcast Wi-Fi, or you can jailbreak your iPhone and turn on tethering. So for those people who are willing to follow one of those paths, there are other ways to get connectivity on your iPad. But I guess, I mean, what I wish I could tell people is, well, just try it out for a while and see if you need 3G connectivity. But it's not like you can just add a 3G module later, so that's not really very practical.
Yeah. Well, you've been a Mac user for some time. I'm curious, have you been a text expander user? I know a lot of people in this industry love that application, and if so, are there any tips that you use on your iPad to make better use of your time?
Yeah, I use Text Expander on my Macs, on my iPhone, on my iPad. I was a Type It For Me user, and I mean they're very similar in their feature sets, but eventually Text Expander's extra sort of tricks won me over. And one of those tricks is that on iOS devices, it's possible for third-party developers to build in support so that you don't have to switch to another app, do your typing with your abbreviations, and then copy and paste into another app. You can actually be typing in Simple Note or in Things or in quite a few other apps, and the abbreviations expand automatically. So that's very cool. I wish that also worked in Apple's apps like Mail on Safari. I mean, it's true that you can compose an email message in Text Expander and then pop it into Mail pretty easily, but I keep wishing I keep wishing the Text Expander would solve certain problems. Like, okay, in Mail on the iPad, if you want to send something to a group, you can't. You have to enter each address individually, which is just it's a real irritation.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I had a moment like, oh, that's okay though. I have Text Expander. I'll just put all the email addresses in an abbreviation, into a snippet, and I'll have an abbreviation that's the group name, and I'll type that and expand it. It's like, oh yeah, except that doesn't actually work in Mail. I really wish that Apple would be a little more open with the ways apps could hook into each other. Obviously, it has improved a lot. I'm glad we have copy and paste. I'm glad we have document support and so on. I love Text Expander. I mean, if I can't tell you how many times I would have had to type Devon Think Pro Office when I was writing that Take Control book. It would have driven me completely crazy. Instead, I just typed DTPO, and I have abbreviations for lots of things that I type all the time. If you have to, your address or directions to your house or office or whatever, it can just save you so much typing, and especially when you don't have a physical keyboard hooked up, when you're just using the virtual keyboard, something like Text Expander can really be a godsend.
Yeah. I really wish Apple would start having universal plugins, and I'm hoping with the next Safari version on the iPad, they'll adapt this HTML5 plugin support. That I think would be killer.
That would be awesome. I'm not going to get my hopes up, but that would be great.
Yeah. Well, what app are you still missing from your iPad? For me, it's GarageBand, because I want to be able to podcast on the iPad. I know it's possible, I just don't have the app. What apps are you still missing?
Well, it's funny you should mention GarageBand, because I do with Tidbits, we do podcast recordings of all of our articles, And I just today stumbled across an app. It's a $10 app from Harmonic Dog called Multitrack DAW, as in Digital Audio Workstation. Now, this is just for recording audio. It's not for like virtual instruments and all the other stuff GarageBand does, loops and all that. But I'm really eager to try it out because it might give me a solution for doing basic podcast recordings. I'm hoping that I can plug a USB mic into my iPad camera connection kit and then use this thing to do my audio recording and editing. So, fingers crossed, but it looks promising anyway. So yeah, to answer your question,
I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah. To answer your question, I sort of mentioned this before. The one app I really wish I had for my own work on the iPad is Microsoft Word. I have tried every app that advertises Word compatibility, that claims to import and export or, open and save Word format documents, and they all kind of work, but none of them that I have tried so far works well enough that I can do what I need to do strictly on my iPad. So that's the one thing I'm kind of holding out for. I don't really think Microsoft will come up with it, but maybe somebody will. There is this app that's kind of weird and interesting called Always on PC, and basically it gives you a VNC connection to a virtual PC running in the cloud someplace. So you get your own desktop that's preloaded with a bunch of, open source apps, including OpenOffice.org and, Firefox and a bunch of other tools. So assuming that you have a very fast always-on internet connection of whichever sort, and assuming that OpenOffice.org will do everything you need, it is possible to do most of what you need to do in this sort of weird way, but because it's all the computing is happening on a virtual machine somewhere in the cloud, it's a lot more cumbersome to get stuff into and out of that than if it were simply running locally on your iPad. So it's an interesting idea, but I don't know if it's really the solution yet. I would also like to see a text editor that supports syntax coloring for Markdown, because we use Markdown for tidbits, we use Markdown for Macworld, and of course you can write plain text and whatever, but I really like the syntax coloring. That would be cool. And I have to say, I'm a bit surprised that Apple has not come out with iWeb for the iPad, because that seems like it would be a really natural fit. And I have a couple of little sites I've done in iWeb. I don't usually use it, but it seems like it would be a very good thing for the iPad's target market.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a Rapid Weaver user, so I've been dying for them to make one, but I don't think that'll come out anytime soon.
Right.
John, do you have any more questions you'd like to chime in with?
Well, Joe, do you anticipate a second wave of iPad apps? Do you see an increase in productivity apps coming now that developers have had the device in their hand for a number of months?
Well, I don't know about a second wave as such, but I certainly think the number will keep growing and growing. And I've definitely seen evidence that productivity apps are becoming increasingly significant reasons to own an iPad. I do want to say, though, that when iOS 4 comes out, I think there's going to be a surge, because all of a sudden, it's just like with the iPhone. All of a sudden, all these limitations went away, and you have new multitasking capabilities and new this and that, and so I think that a lot of developers will be quick to jump on the iOS 4.x bandwagon and come out with either new versions, new apps that make use of some of that stuff. But just as I try to keep my eye on business-related apps as I contemplate the next update to this book. It seems like every time I turn around, there's a new app or a new update or a new capability, and it just seems like people are really, really interested in using their iPads this way, and I have every reason to expect that'll continue.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a ball that's rolling downhill, and it's going to keep rolling.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any accessories that you've played with that are making the iPad more productive for work friendly?
Well, I mean, um, not so much. I've got the array of Apple stuff, and I have the Apple case and the iPad, the VGA connector and the iPad camera connection kit, and I have the keyboard dock, and I use them all. I certainly would be far less happy with my iPad if I did not have an external keyboard, because the virtual keyboard's okay, especially in landscape mode. But I'm a touch typist, and I'm a really fast touch typist, but I have to have the tactile feedback. So having an external keyboard is a really, really big deal to me, and I'm delighted that there are multiple ways of getting that on the iPad. Obviously, if you're going to give a presentation with Keynote or whatever, having the VGA adapter is cool, and I'm a strong proponent of having some kind of a case, any kind of a case. I still, I mean, I've had this thing for months, but I still feel afraid to carry it around. I'm afraid I'm going to either drop it on something or drop it on like a glass tabletop and break something with it. So I feel just a lot safer carrying it around when I've got some kind of a basic case on it. But other than that, there aren't any accessories that I have so far found to be indispensable. But I mean, new things are coming out all the time, and you never know.
Yeah. I've heard about the clamshell case that basically turns your iPad into an eMate, basically.
Right. Yeah, I saw that. That's interesting. I'm not. I don't know how I feel about that, but it is an interesting idea.
Yeah. Well, if someone's going to buy a keyboard, would you recommend the dock or the Bluetooth way to go about it?
I have both. Most of the time, when I'm sitting at my desk, the iPad is in the keyboard dock, so it can sync and it can charge, and I can use the keyboard, and that's the most logical thing for me. The geometry of the keyboard dock is just weird. It's just it's flat like the keyboard, except for this thing in the back that just sticks out awkwardly. And I can't believe Apple didn't make it smaller or foldable or in some other way just more compact, because it's not something you can throw in a flat bag of any kind like you can just a regular Bluetooth keyboard. So I guess my feeling is that if you're mainly going to be using your iPad in one place at a desk, the keyboard dock is perfect. But if you're going to be toting it around, and you need to move around a lot, and you want the maximum portability, then use a regular Apple Bluetooth keyboard, and whatever kind of case will put it in the position you need. Now, I've seen that there are and will be in the near future even smaller third-party keyboards that fold up in various ways. I haven't tried any of them with an iPad, so I can't say how well they work. But I mean, Apple's keyboard is small enough and good enough for my needs.
Yeah. Well, at the time of your book, I don't think Jailbreaking was released yet. I thought it was a month or two after.
Yeah, no, it hadn't happened yet, really.
Is Jailbreaking something that would help people be more productive on their iPads?
Well, honestly, the only major reason I can see to do that right now is something like tethering. So, I mean, you could jailbreak your iPad and then share, if you have a 3G model, and share its 3G connection with something else, for example. There aren't any other apps or capabilities that are essential to me, to what I do, that would be compelling enough to make me want to jailbreak my iPad. I do sort of, I mean, Apple has a long history of somebody will come up with a jailbreaking method, and Apple will, zap that in the next software update. And the next software update will also contain some crucial feature that I really need. And so I have to choose, do I want the new feature or do I want the jailbreaking? And meanwhile, I'm scared to death that I'm going to brick my iDevice. So for me, the risks are not necessarily worth the reward, at least when you're talking about an iPad, and at least when you're talking about business applications. Now, outside that realm, I can think of other reasons to consider it, but I think that if you're mainly looking to be productive on your iPad, you can probably do without.
Okay. And I have one final thought here. Where do you see the iPad going with iOS 4 and beyond? Is it going to become main computers for people?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying I can't wait for iOS 4. Like everyone else, I was really excited to get all these new features on my iPhone, and then I immediately felt kind of resentful that I couldn't do the same things on my iPad. It just seems so, second quarter 2010 now, just really, old-fashioned. So I'll be super happy when the iPad has folders and when the Mail app has a unified inbox and there's better multitasking and all that stuff. What's going to happen? Like after that, like I said before, I'm really terrible at making technology predictions. Hardware-wise, people are saying, well, next generation iPad is going to have a higher res display and a front-facing camera, and those would be great. I hope it does. Other than that, I'm not really feeling like there are any huge deficits in the hardware. For what I need right now, it seems perfectly fine and reasonable, and I'm kind of okay with it evolving. However, software-wise, we talked about some of the file transfer mess, and I really wish that Apple would find some way to let apps access some sort of common file storage area like you can do on any computer, and hopefully they can find a way of doing it without sacrificing security. But I mean, I just don't know if they're going to go that way. When you talk about using an iPad as your main computer, it seems clear to me that Apple doesn't want you to do that. I mean, obviously, they want you to buy a Mac, too, and they require that you have a Mac or a PC for setup and firmware upgrades and things like that. So Apple would rather you didn't, and I think they're going to they're going to continue to make you want to have another computer. But even if they didn't, I sort of feel like it's its own thing. There are however the iPad evolves, I feel like there are always going to be things that a conventional computer is better at. A conventional computer is always going to be able to have a bigger display, and sometimes you need that. It's always going to have more storage, and sometimes you need that. It's always going to have, higher amounts of RAM and CPU speeds, and sometimes you need that. So it's one thing to say that for web surfing and email and very sort of simple basic activities, yes, if that's all you do with your computer, it could certainly replace it. But if you do heavier duty stuff with your computer, I just don't think it ever will. But I think that's also okay because it's not supposed to be a slate PC. It's supposed to be its sort of own thing, and I'm really okay with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, John, before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
No, I think Joe's been a wealth of information, and I thank him for that.
Yes, definitely. It's been great talking. I know it's gone a little long. But before we wrap it up, what projects are you working on? Where can people find your work? Any plugs or mentions you want to bring up here?
Sure. Well, I'm always working on a million things. Well, my wife and I just had a baby a couple of months ago, so that's kind of an ongoing project.
Yeah.
So I'm working on major updates to a couple of Take Control books, including the one about mail on iOS devices, as well as my book on Mobile Me. And of course, the book that we've been talking about, the Take Control of Working with Your iPad. As soon as iOS 4 comes out for the iPad, I will definitely be updating the book to cover that, and also to cover any interesting new apps that are relevant. And I have another Take Control project that will be coming out this fall that I can't really say much about, but I'll just say that if you are a fan of the iPad and a fan of programs like DevonThink, you'll probably really want this book. And I'm doing I have some other web stuff brewing, and I'm contemplating a pretty big project that will appeal to people who like Paris and iPhones and cute babies. But check back in a couple of months.
Okay, very cool.
So as for where people can find me, if you want the book that we've been talking about or any of my other various Take Control books, go to takecontrolbooks.com. You can find out about me on my lame-o personal website, joekissell.com, or you can follow me at twitter.com/Joe Kissell. I really don't blog or tweet very much, but I try to substitute quality for quantity, I guess. So you can at least get the sort of major news that way.
Very cool. Well, thank you once again for your time. I know it's late over there, so I don't want to keep you all night.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been great.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So that was the interview John and I had with Joe Kissell. And he is, once again, found at tidbits and joekissell.com. And I'd like to thank him once again for his time. A lot of great information, valuable information that I think will be a good reference tool going forward for working with your iPad. So if you'd like to leave feedback for this show, you can do that by emailing me at ipadpossibilities@gmail.com, or you could call into 209-542-iPad and leave your voicemail message there. I'd be happy to answer those and play some of those on the show if necessary. So call in or send an email. It'd be greatly appreciated for your feedback. If you would like to support this podcast, the best way to do that would be going to gadgetfreeway.com. They are the sponsor of this podcast, and they have all sorts of just really unique and great iPad accessories and Bluetooth accessories and things like that. They also have a wide variety of iPad cases now. They're starting to carry more and more of those, so they've got the outer box iPad Defender case and the commuter case, and those are two fantastic cases. Also, check out the iPad Pillow for, if you want to work with your iPad in bed, or if you want to just simply enjoy your iPad watching movies, reading a book in bed. The iPad Pillow is a custom-made pillow for your iPad, and it looks very cool. I'm going to be getting my hands on one pretty soon here to give you guys a full review, but it looks very cool, and I'm very excited to play with that as I use my iPad in bed quite a bit. So go to gadgetfreeway.com, and that is the very, very best way to support this podcast and show that I want more episodes of this podcast, and I support you guys, and do that by going to gadgetfreeway.com. With that said, you've been listening to the iPad Possibilities Podcast on tppn.tv. This is Tim, and I will talk to everyone again next time.